Pay attention because what we're going to see today is not going to be a typical chess game. We have two women as protagonists, two very high level players, and one of them, the one with the white pieces, as you'll see in a moment, does something quite unexpected, a somewhat peculiar approach, but the truth is that it's very uncomfortable for the opponent. You'll understand it right away. This idea I'm mentioning, along with a tremendous final blow that will fascinate you, I assure you, ends up deciding the game in her favor. In this video, I want you to do two things. Let's see. First of all, enjoy the game above all, and also get ideas so you can use them in your own games. Oh, and before we start, a very quick thing that you've asked me a lot about the Academy. Isn't there a free trial, Chess Teacher? No, there is no free trial. But hey, you can join, and if you don't feel like it, you don't like it, or it's not what you expected, contact us and we'll give you your money back. Okay? I prefer to do this because I'm so sure you'll like it that I'd rather you try it for yourself. Now then, let's get to the game. You have it right down here in the description if you want to join the Academy. The game started with Queen's Pawn. Let's see, the opening isn't the most interesting thing in the world, so we're going to go through it a bit quickly. Knight f6, c4. This is totally normal. g6. It seems that black is setting up a King's Indian defense that would continue, for example, with bishop g7 and later with d6, but you'll see that they quickly transform it into a Grunfeld with this d5. The difference between the King's Indian and the Grunfeld is that the King's Indian is played with d6 and the Grunfeld attacks the center directly with d5. Extremely interesting. Pawn takes pawn, knight takes d5, and white continues pressing this d5 point with g3. Now they're going to develop the bishop via the fianchetto on the long diagonal and directly provide strong pressure on the knight on d5. Bishop g7, bishop g2, both fianchetto, and now, due to this pressure I was mentioning, black has several options. Perhaps the main one would be to exchange knights so as not to lose time, right? In fact, that's what happened in the game. You could also play, for example, c6, right? Fortifying the knight, but as you can see, it could also be kicked out with e4. And black would really stay a bit passive, which is why they decide to exchange knights on c3, which is a very good idea. Differences now between the bishops. White's bishop points directly at the b7 point, a fairly weak point, which at the same time prevents the light-squared bishop from developing, because if it develops, not only would the pawn be lost, but also the rook, as it would have no escape. And conversely, the dark-squared bishop is crashing against a mass of pawns. You know that when pawns are defended in the same direction as the bishop, it's usually very bad for the opponent's bishop, because it's pointing directly at an over-defended point. And so we can see that the difference is that white controls the center and has a good bishop, and black doesn't control the center and has a bad bishop. Obviously, black also has things in their favor. They have a better pawn structure, since this pawn on c3 is a serious weakness, which the black player takes direct advantage of with this Ca5. Very interesting. Very interesting. You'll see why. Now, obviously, the pawn can't be captured because bishop takes c3 would follow, check, and the rook would be lost. You see it, right? So logically, this pawn is untouchable. I'll also tell you one thing. Pawn takes pawn is being threatened, pawn takes pawn, and now this pawn would be totally defenseless. It could be captured by either the bishop or the queen. Therefore, there's a real threat here, right? There's a threat of winning a pawn, a central pawn, the one on d4. So white has to defend it. Maybe advancing it wouldn't be a good idea because the rook would be lost again, right? With bishop takes c3. Maybe defending it and then advancing it wouldn't be a good idea either because the pawn structure wouldn't look very good. So white opts for e3. Here begins, and only begins, the peculiar approach that the white pieces are going to start taking. As you can see, it's not normal to place all the pawns on dark squares, right? This already grates on us a bit, all of us who are used to trying to set up a fairly healthy pawn structure, where probably this pawn would be maybe a little better on c4, or even better, it would be better when they're exchanged, right? But now this pawn on c3 is left a bit backward at the mercy of attacks, for example with queen to a5, which is actually what happened in the game. Therefore, white does have certain advantages, but be careful because black is also starting to pressure on their side, right? On the dark squares. This point must be defended. They do it with bishop to d2. Makes perfect sense. This also threatens the queen with a possible discovered attack from c4, threatening the queen and later maybe closing with d5. Not now, because there would be many attacks, right? But maybe in the future. And black, seeing that they can't make these discovered attacks now, simply castles. Pay attention because here continues the peculiar approach that made me choose this game to show you. Knight to a3, knight to h3, sorry. What do you think of this move? Strange, right? Not only because it develops to the side, we already know that's a bit peculiar. Normally, we want to bring the knights toward the center, but also it doesn't have a good way out, because f4 doesn't seem like the best way out either, right? It can be squeezed, for example, with a g5. This knight is not solid here. So why develop via h3? Well, you're going to see it next, since after the move knight to c6 by the black pieces, the white player continues with f4. Don't tell me that this W-shaped setup isn't unusual, right? The king in the center, the pawns charging ahead through central squares, all on dark squares, where the bishop on d2 is becoming very unimportant. On the contrary, it's being quite hindered. You already know that when you have the pawns on dark squares, the good bishop is the one on the light squares, see? And the bad bishop is the black one because it hits its own pawn structure, right? The idea of this f4 is nothing more than to go and launch an attack on the opponent's king and also leave this gap when a pawn moves that leaves gaps to be able to recycle this knight. On f2 it'll be fine because, look, it takes advantage of all the gaps, starting with h3, g4, e4, and d3, where it will be able to jump with total ease. In addition, this queen will also be able to pass, and it doesn't end here. You'll see that instead of castling, he tries to attack with the h-pawn as well. A very unusual approach, but you'll see that it's extremely effective. Very well, black withdraws the queen to c7, seeing that it has no more future here. It's truly not attacking anything, right? We must also understand when a piece is no longer doing anything and try to place it on a better square. On c7, it can switch to defense when white tries to push forward too much. This knight is not really effective yet, right? That's why it's recycled to f2. Here, it'll be a little bit more so. Many of you will wonder, would it be a good idea for black to exchange this bishop for this knight? No, definitely not. Giving up the bishop pair in exchange for a knight that is also poorly placed, no matter how much the knight can be better positioned, is not a good idea. In addition, this bishop can pass through all the white square gaps that, if the black pieces didn't have it, really this bishop, this queen, and this knight could roam freely. And practically no one could attack them. That's why it's important to also keep this c8 bishop. This game has many nuances, and I recommend that you watch it more than once. You probably aren't understanding everything the first time if you're not used to seeing this type of analysis, but that's okay. You can watch it as many times as you need. Save this video well. Knight f2, as we mentioned, e6. I suppose that trying to get into the mind of the player with the black pieces, she wanted to avoid any kind of subsequent break after this f5, right? Trying to open up all this castling. That's why she plays e6, and indeed, as I was telling you, h4. Don't tell me that this doesn't seem peculiar to you, as I was telling you in the introduction. Yes, in fact it is, but you're gonna see how it ends up dealing a mortal blow that honestly is one of the most beautiful games I've seen. Not only because of this, but also because of its ending. b6 to try to develop this bishop, and definitely h5 to try to open lines and reach a lightning attack against the black piece's king. Bishop b7, capturing this pawn is obviously not a good idea since queen takes h5 would follow and the checkmate, I would tell you, would be unstoppable. Not unstoppable because this rook could be moved aside, but you would already let the queen in, and this would indeed be a tremendous disaster, right? That's why black, instead of capturing, plays bishop b7. White opens lines with pawn takes pawn to open the rook, and the normal thing would be to capture with the h-pawn, right? You know that very important rule that says always try to capture toward the center? Something very important that I don't know if many of you know is that the least valuable pawn in the position is the h-pawn and the a-pawn because it's the only one that can only capture in one direction. As you can see, let's take the pawn as an example. It can capture in two directions, right? To e5 and to g5. On the other hand, the h-pawn can only capture in one direction, g6. That's why, if we try to bring this pawn toward g6, we turn a bad pawn, or a less good one, into a much better pawn, right? That's why they always say to capture from the outside in. To give you an idea, all pawns are initially worth 1 point, except for the side pawns, which are said to be worth 0.7. Okay? It's true. So a central pawn is worth more than a side pawn. Although, in the future, imagine if this pawn becomes a passed pawn, it would be worth much more, right? Very well. But in this case, black chooses to capture with the f pawn. Strange decision, I won't lie. It's a bit of an odd decision where too many weaknesses are probably created. Especially, I'm seeing this d6 point, which will be critical in the game. What happens is that the idea of the player with the black pieces was to open the file for the rook. Correct or not? I don't think so. Let's see it next. White continues with queen g4, bringing the queen into the attack and pressing these weak points. Weaknesses aren't weaknesses if we don't attack them, right? That's how it is. If this point is a weakness but we don't attack it, it's useless. We must put pressure on it so that black has to bring pieces to defend them and position themselves defensively. This rook can't leave now because it has to be on the lookout for this e6 point, right? And we already have a piece attacking here, a rook attacking the h7 point, which right now is the weakest point in the position since it's the only point defended only by the king. And so now we must think about how to continue. And what the white player does is take the opportunity to bring in more pieces. 94. Look at this setup. They haven't castled, right? White hasn't castled. It wouldn't be right for the king to castle either long or short, because we've seen that both flanks have opened up. The most correct place is the center. We can observe that now that white has the king in the center, what black should try to do is open it up with their rooks. Go for the king. It wouldn't even make much sense for black to try to maintain material equality. It would be more interesting to sacrifice, for example, a knight to open lines to attack that king in the center, because otherwise he'll be completely safe, right? Flavia explained that to us in one of those tremendous classes she gives us at the academy, right? The idea then for the black pieces now will be the following. Obviously capturing pawns just to open the position pawn for pawn, obviously capturing with the c-pawn. Capturing with the e-pawn would mean opening up the position for the king. We're doing black a favor, aren't we? And so now, a very interesting move by the black pieces. Pay attention. e5. At first glance, a pawn is sacrificed, but that pawn can't be taken. Let me explain. Whether it's taken with the d-pawn or the f-pawn, the continuation would be as follows. Try to follow along with me mentally. You can pause the video, do it on your board, or watch it as many times as you need. If we capture, black captures with the knight, sacrificing it. See? Again, d takes e5, knight takes e5, for example, pawn takes e5, and now it could be captured with the queen, or with the bishop, or with the rook, where the knight is being attacked, the rook on a1 is also being attacked, lines are opening up toward the king, and they've given up a knight in exchange for all this attack. This would be very beneficial for the black pieces. That's why here, it seems black has found a good solution to attack the exposed king in the center. You know, you have to be very careful when the king is trapped in the center of the position, right? But here, the player with the white pieces surprised me immensely with the next move she made. She didn't capture this pawn. Instead, she did the following. Watch closely. Rook takes h7 directly. When we see a game like this, we say, okay, sure. I've seen many sacrifices like this, but when we're used to playing tournament games, which I know many of you do, when a move like this is played against you, your look of concern really reaches unexpected levels because it's not normal. Right, here on YouTube, we're used to people compiling very interesting games with brutal blows like this one, but it's not normal, okay friends? This is not normal. Why is this rook sacrificed on h7? Well, this rook is untouchable. If captured, knight g5 check would follow, the king would have to move, and then the queen would enter with drastic consequences. That's why here, black must look for another solution, and they find an interesting one by counter-sacrificing the knight on d4. Look at what a brutal game. A game to watch several times, right? The map is counter-gifted, I don't even know how to speak, on the d4 square. Capturing this knight would be a mistake. Look, I'll show you. Because then the pawn would be captured, for example, on f4, lines would open up here, lines would open up there, the knight doubly attacked, and this would be a serious problem for the white pieces. They probably wouldn't be lost, but it would be a fairly equal position. However, here, the white player plays with total precision and ends up winning this game. Watch out, rook c1 attacking the queen. The queen has to move. It wouldn't be a good idea to come and defend this weak point on g6, because by playing rook takes h7, the g6 point has been weakened, you see. The defender has been removed. But coming to defend with the queen on f7 would allow the knight to enter. This point would also remain defended. The rook could no longer be captured. This would be bad for the white pieces, which is why the queen moves to e7. Right? Why? So he doesn't gain that tempo with knight g5, right? But now, logically, you can keep on capturing this point on g6. Look, they haven't even touched that knight. They're not interested. And now, after the attempt to trade queens by the black pieces, you know that also in another class we have at the Academy about evaluating when it's good to trade pieces and when it's not, huh? Look at everything we have in the Academy, huh? If it doesn't convince you, I'll give you your money back, okay? I guarantee it. The idea is that white, of course, should not accept this exchange of queens, right? Obviously, they're attacking. They have a lightning attack. Trading queens would be horrible. And they end up doing it this way. A specific piece trading solution that ends up giving them the victory. It's an exception, okay, of trading pieces because we have a specific variation that allows us to win. Queen takes, and king takes. Let me set this right. And you're going to see that now what the player with the white pieces had found here is that she could enter with the rook on the 7th. Rook on the 7th rank, and the game is in the bank. Rook c7 check, and I take the bishop. Therefore, no matter what, they must block with the rook to defend. And now comes this wonderful move. Knight d6, and look at what it does. Yes, the rook is sacrificed, but if this rook were to be captured, knight takes rook would follow, knight takes e8 check, and I'm going to take the other rook. And look how beautiful, huh? If you take the rook that I'm giving you, I'm going to take both of your rooks. Therefore, they have no other choice. Since the rook is being attacked by two pieces, the bishop is being attacked, then to place both rooks on this diagonal, on this rank, right? So once the rooks are here, rook takes b7. Look how beautiful this is. Rook takes b7, and now one would say, which rook do I take? No, I'm not going to take either one, because since both are under attack, okay, on the next move, you won't be able to save both, so I'll take your knight. And now I'm going to take one of the two rooks. I mean, whichever one you move, I'm going to take it, right? So, or whatever you move, I'm going to take it. I don't even know what I'm saying. Now, when you take here, I simply take one of the two rooks, in this case, this one here, because it's doubly attacked by the bishop and the rook. And the game continued for a few more moves. Rook d7 and bishop takes f4. And as you can see here, black resigned because honestly, 3 pieces and a pawn against a rook is completely impossible to defend, no matter what you do. What an interesting game, right, friends? Well, if you liked it, as always, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. For more games like this, try the Academy, guys. Check it out. I recommend it 100%, as I know there are people who still haven't tried it. If you don't like it, I'll give you your money back, of course. You already know we have a launch offer. If you join now, you're going to keep this price forever. As long as you want, of course, you can leave whenever you want. There's no commitment. We've invested an immeasurable amount of money. You have no idea. To create this very interesting academy with this well-formulated app created by grandmasters. You already know it's developed by Grandmaster Mauricio Flores and some spectacular engineers. So you're gonna love it, of course. Slavia's classes are impressive. I love them. Even I watch them 2 or 3 times. So join the academy. You'll love it. And I'll stop being a pain now, and I'll see you tomorrow in the next video, friends.